Hey guys, thanks for joining us today on Sports Business Nation. I'm your host, Ryan Deal. We're thrilled to have you on board for the inaugural season of SBN, the podcast and content provider founded by passionate young sports professionals for the benefit of other passionate students and professionals of all types. The business of sports goes so much deeper than contract signings and Super Bowl rings, and here at SBN, we host top-level professionals from the real world of front office sports to gain from their insights on a different core subject each week. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can join us all season for an insider's look, and please tell your friends, family, and colleagues to do the same. To learn more about our mission here at Sports Business Nation and see everything we have to offer, please visit our website at www.sportsbusinessnation.com and follow us on all your social media, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of saturated market. I don't just think sports. I think everything else that New York City has to offer.
Businesses have so many different opportunities and avenues they can go down to entertain and get in front of their clients. And it's how are you going to be the one that stands out?
For this episode, we're going to examine what it means to work and sell in a saturated sports market. A quote, saturated market refers to one that is crowded and competitive, and they are common in many types of industries nowadays because of high consumer demand for their products. All saturated markets are built of brands looking to differentiate themselves from one another, be those beer companies that dominate our TV ads or car companies who flaunt safety awards and gas mileage comparisons. Working in a saturated market often means that whatever product you're providing is very desirable within the territory, so opportunities should not be in short supply. However, it's understanding how to stand out from the crowd that becomes the tough part.
We have a bit of a reputation, New Jersey and New Yorkers, for being pretty tough people. Trying to sell in this market, I think, has been crucial.
We're lucky enough to be joined for our conversation by two sports sales veterans from the New York City area, Ryan England of Madison Square Garden Company and Rob Moran of the Prudential Center. Ryan England is currently the Director of Premium Hospitality at MSG, as well as a South Boston native and a UMass alum. Ryan has worked for several teams in the New York City area, having served previously as a manager of premium sales for the New York Jets, as well as an account executive for ticket sales at the New York Mets. Rob Moran, after graduating from Rutgers University, has spent the last 7 years building his career and working up the internal hierarchy of the Prudential Center to his current role as the Senior Manager of Premium Partnerships. Both Rob and Ryan are in their late 20s, with years of firsthand experience of the good, the bad, and the ugly sides of America's most saturated sports market, the New York City tri-state area.
Knowing that I have the ability to walk into work on a given day and there might be a Rangers game that night and then a Knicks game the next day and then a concert the day after that. I'd be out of my mind not to be excited about that.
All right. Thanks so much. And with that, we'll welcome you into today's conversation. For the benefit of our listeners and audience today, would each of you introduce yourselves and tell us what it is you do?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. This is Ryan England. I work at Madison Square Garden as our Director of Premium Hospitality.
And this is Rob Moran. I'm the Senior Manager of Premium Hospitality over at the Prudential Center and New Jersey Devils.
Well, especially as today is a Friday, we really appreciate you gentlemen making some time available to speak with us here on Sports Business Nation and educate our audience a bit. Crux of today's conversation is going to be on finding success selling in a saturated market in sports, finding out what that means, what sort of trials and tribulations come along with it. And you two are excellent guests for us to have on the subject. So as we dive in here, I'll start off with a bit of an easier question for the two of you. You're each incredibly personable, driven, charismatic guys, both in the office and in your personal lives. As you look back on your childhood, are there any experiences, qualities, characteristics that you can cite specifically that maybe indicated to you that you'd be an excellent person to do this in sports business down the road? Ryan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Rob will touch on something similar, and it's a little bit cliche, but just growing up playing sports and being a part of a team. Obviously, every team you're on, you have your personal responsibility that you have to, you're trying to pull your own weight, but at the same time, chasing that singular goal. I always enjoyed that growing up, and certainly one of the first things that made me realize, I want to be around sports beyond, when my playing days end. So. Just looking at growing up in sports and beyond that, just being generally sociable. And, that's what we do in sales. We talk to people. So, those are really the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, I would say the big thing for me growing up as a kid was just seeing both the work ethic of my parents and just how organized they were. I feel like day to day in sales, being organized is very important. Just getting after it making sure you're staying on, that quote unquote grind. But also, I mean, both my parents worked two jobs growing up as a kid and did everything they could to put me through school and my brother through school. So, those were by far the two biggest things I picked up on, from a very early age that have definitely carried on, to this day, and helped me grow in my career.
Well, work ethic is certainly something that's important in all industries, and I'm sure is something that led to both of your guys' success here in sports thus far. I know for me personally, my lifelong passion for sports and really the sport experience itself was one of the main reasons that I decided to get into sports business industry coming out of school. From your own personal appreciation and some of your memories, can you cite anything that happened to you growing up that maybe is a great reference of how impactful the sports experience can be?
Yeah, I mean, the number one experience to me comes to mind is, and you're not going to enjoy hearing this, but that 2004 Red Sox run. I mean, just watching every single one of those games with my father, and being enthralled in the entirety of all, every single game that off season that was, that postseason, excuse me, that was, you remember those games going 4 or 5 hours a night, and just the weight behind each of them. So that 3 week stretch in October 2004. I mean, that was kind of the drug that I knew I wanted to keep going back to for sports. So again, I know as a Yankees fan, that's not what you want to hear, but that's definitely what it was for me.
Yeah, for me personally, my like fanhood always came from my grandfather. Both my parents weren't the biggest of sports fans, but going back, being a little kid, although that wasn't the case with my parents, I remember, just memories of my father always taking me to Yankee games and Giants games, and just always kind of getting out there and just kind of immediately understanding that importance of, the father-son time and getting out there, even though he didn't care what was going on the field or on the court, wherever we were. It was more of an opportunity to spend time with his kids, my brother and I. And I definitely think that's kind of translated to the passion I have for the industry and for being a sports fan.
Interesting to hear you guys talk about it, both winning experiences from Ryan and some losing experiences from Rob. As we had Luda Pauly on earlier this season, he was talking about controlling what you control, and you can't control the wins and losses, but the experience is so much more than that. And obviously, you guys appreciated that from an early age. So for each of you, again, looking at some of the formative years of your childhood and growing up, can you, either of you or both of you, ideally, cite a job or two that you had when you were younger where you really had to learn some lessons the hard way, but ultimately you benefited from it?
Yeah, I mean, my summer job back in South Boston for 5 or 6 years, I worked at a yacht club in Southie. As you can imagine, yeah, not exactly the fanciest yacht club being in South Boston, but I worked there for 5 years in a service role. And, for me, that was kind of the first, quote unquote, client facing role I had, because even though it wasn't necessarily selling, we had members who paid dues every month and who expected a certain level of service and, a certain level of cleanliness in the club itself. So, every day when I was there, it was, that was my role to make sure that, the club presented itself well, to make sure that I was a friendly face and I was there to, accommodate them, be it, getting people out to their boats, or be it, just helping to clean up the entirety of the club. So again, that was probably 5 or 6 years of my life growing up in the summers. So that's easily the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, so for me, the first job I can remember growing up was working probably as a 16, 17-year-old for my town's Department of Public Works. So, the different baseball fields around town and mowing lawns and weed whacking, that kind of stuff. And it was a pretty easy job to slack off on, and quickly learned that really no matter what job you're doing, that shouldn't be the case. And that kind of goes back to the early lessons of thinking back to my parents and the work ethic they taught me. And
Well, it sounds like one common theme we're seeing across both of you gentlemen, as well as some of our other guests, is, just general grit, grind, and work ethic here. I appreciate those stories. Realizing that you guys here, both of you in your late 20s, been doing this since you got out of school. Can you tell us about something that now, in 2018, even going back 5 years when you were early in the sports industry, is just completely innovated and changed from how you did it 5 years ago?
I think what comes to mind for me is we're not all the way there yet, but you see the continued push and kind of insistence on trying to get everybody to use tickets digitally as opposed to the hard stock. Certainly, still we all know that there are a lot of holdovers and folks who still want to get that hard ticket in that kind of glamour stock. And I know for us at MSG, we certainly haven't eliminated it. Haven't eliminated it yet, but I think across the industry, the amount that you see teams switching over to strictly e-tickets, or even, if they want the hard copy tickets, an additional fee for that. So that, being in the ticketing world, in some capacity, that's what comes to mind immediately for me.
So I would say the biggest difference from when I started my career to now is just the impact of social media, between using Instagram and Twitter to get outreach and market to fan bases, to LinkedIn and getting in touch with prospects and current clients. I would say those are two huge things that definitely weren't available when I was first starting out, but are something that are a huge focus for marketing for our organization, but my own personal outreach with different people that I'm trying to get in touch with.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense here with everything that's gone on technology-wise the last 5 years or so. And staying in your early years in sports here, as you guys look back here on the early career, can each of you or either of you point to a mistake or two that you made that may have seemed like a big issue at the time, but long-term ended up being a great mistake to make?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, I don't have one particular one in mind. I just think of all of the phone calls and one-on-one interactions as we're trying to learn the sales process, and talking over yourself, or saying product wrong, or just being flat out nervous as you're trying to have a conversation with somebody to sell them on a product. I mean, you heard my early sales pitches to where I am now, and yeah, I just go back to those first ones that felt every time that you didn't get a sale, or every time that you think that you messed up the sales pitch, or just the process as a whole. It felt like you had this massive failure on your shoulder. And one of the breakthroughs when I felt like when I finally actually started to have a little bit of success in sales was when I stopped. Not that I wasn't caring, but anytime that there was a miss, it was like, okay, have that closer's mindset. You messed up that one, move on to the next one, and as you get those reps in, you continue to improve, and before you know it, it's second nature. So while it's not a specific mistake, I know for a fact there were countless early conversations and early sales pitches where I was still trying to figure out what I was doing, and I needed those reps to finally get to where I felt comfortable and was at least somewhat effective.
Yeah, I would totally second that. I think one of the biggest things that my first director in sales taught me was really just trying to be myself on the phone. You have this script that you're kind of taught when you're starting out, and you want to make sure you're asking all the, quote unquote, right questions, and hitting all like the right buckets with each conversation. But no one's really going to buy into that if you're not sounding genuine. So that was I guess my biggest mistake was waiting too long to let my actual personality come out. And relax and just, be myself on each phone call and each meeting that I was going on.
Well, and I'd imagine one of the main reasons guys like you get hired is because you are personable and you're enjoyable and it's fun to be around you. So you might as well let that show and get along better with your clients. That makes a lot of sense. As we look at today's topic specifically, selling in a saturated market and finding success, before we can get into that, I think we need to define what exactly a saturated market is and maybe what makes it unique from some other obstacles. So we'll start with Ryan again. Could each of you very briefly just kind of give us some insights on what it means to sell in a saturated market in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, beyond even just, of course, we have, nearly 10 professional sports teams here in the greater New York area. But even beyond that, I mean, we're working or dealing with world-class dining. We're dealing with Broadway. We're dealing with, a number of other ways that, the corporate crowd that myself and Rob are both trying to sell on a in a given sale. We're dealing with a lot of other options that people can spend their money and entertain their clients or host their VIPs. And so it's not even just competing within the sports industry. It's competing with entertaining and dining as a whole. And New York City has no shortage of options beyond just catching a game. So we've that's what I think of when I think of saturated market. I don't just think sports. I think everything else that New York City has to offer.
Yeah, I think what's so important to go along with, all the options that people have between, what Ryan said, the different dining, the Broadway, the golf, you really just have to find a way unique with your outreach. It's really just important to stand out. Businesses have so many different opportunities and avenues they can go down to entertain and get in front of their clients. And it's how are you going to be the one that stands out? And that's the importance of, I guess, selling the saturated market. It's what you need to do is be as unique as possible to make sure that you're offering something that, the restaurant down the street, the 5-star restaurant, can't do.
Well, and it sounds very clear from what both of you are saying that it's more than just the competition within your industry. For the two of you, one of you selling the Rangers, one of you selling the Devils, obviously direct competition. But, when Hamilton's getting hot on Broadway, that's stealing from both of you as far as the interest from clients goes. So definitely see where you're coming from on that. You both mentioned the grind earlier in our conversation. And we like to talk a little bit about corporate buzzwords in all industries. And the grind is definitely one that gets overused now in a lot of ways. But it sounds to me like working in such a competitive and saturated market like the New York area, as you both do, it's probably something common. How is it you can stay so mentally focused and tough when you're dealing with such a rigorous grind and so much constant competition?
I think what is really important as it comes to that is that we're not selling products that are necessarily boring. We have the ability to sell excitement. We can sell fun. We can sell events that are A list type events. Knowing that I have the ability to walk into work on a given day, and there might be a Rangers game that night, and then a Knicks game the next day, and then a concert the day after that. I mean, the fact that that's what I get to sell and get to be a part of every day. I'd be out of my mind not to be excited about that, not to be enthusiastic about wanting to move that. I'm sure it's quite the same for Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest thing for me is I go on my career. You start each new sales season, and it can be a bit daunting. How am I going to replicate what I'd done in the past? How am I going to do better than when I did the previous year and hit my goals? But really, it's just knowing and having the confidence in myself that I do have the ability to do it, and I'm going to make sure that I'm working my butt off to get to that point. And also just the amount of talent in this industry and amount of people that are younger than me that would be willing to take my position in a heartbeat. So it's always kind of, you're competing against yourself, you're competing against other people internally, and you're competing against other people externally just within the industry. And that's why I find it pretty easy to continue to push myself and find the new clients that are out there and hone my craft and get better each day.
Sorry, Robbie, cut out there. I was going to say totally second what you say, because you're entirely right that there are so many people who would kill to be able to say that they get to work in sports in some capacity. And, we all know that everybody has their bad days. Everybody has those days where they're beat and they're exhausted and they're tired. But you just got to, remember that there's a million other people who would love to do what we get to do on a day-to-day basis. So Robson, couldn't be, more truthful, and that couldn't be more correct what he just said.
Well, and while I'm sure you both have rough Monday mornings just like anyone else, it certainly sounds a lot more fun when you get to wake up in the morning loving what you do. So, in looking at both Madison Square Garden and the Prudential Center, as we talk about saturated markets, what groups, teams, or departments within your organizations are most impacted by some of the hurdles and parameters that go with it?
I would say, well, I can't speak to specifics of the day-to-day conversations that they have. Our marketing and sponsorship teams are chasing some of the same organizations that we're chasing from a hospitality standpoint. And I know that there's that same type of competition where there's a million different ways that a company can try to get their name out there, specifically within New York City, and nationally. And I'd imagine in their conversations that's a hurdle that they're fighting to get over every single day. Marketing and sponsorship and hospitality naturally kind of run parallel. So a lot of the, be it the saturated market or just the objections that we get in the conversation, I would say our sponsorship and marketing team are seeing that, those same type of conversations, those same type of objections.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And, even more specifically, I would say, going back to my earlier point of being unique with your outreach, it's the same thing. Our marketing team needs to be, as unique as possible and as creative as possible to kind of differentiate themselves and, get more followers and more fans in the building. And another one that I can think of too, I would say just like, the business operations side of things in terms of, our concessionaires and our guest services and making sure that they're the best in the business, because fan experience from the second you walk in the door is what's going to get people coming back. And, if it's the friendly face at the front door, grabbing their ticket and scanning them in to the person that's giving them their hot dog, like, everything needs to be rolling on all cylinders. That way people come in there, they're happy, they're smiling, and, win or lose, they want to come back.
Well, especially with so much competition, making yourself stand out however you can on the experience standpoint, I'm sure is something that all the venues in the area, whatever market they're in, are trying to do and capitalize on. So as we look at some of the obvious cons and pros of competition, having sold primarily in this New York market for the two of you, Ryan at a few different teams, Rob, you've been lucky enough to grow your brand and find success within one venue over at Prudential Center. Can you talk about maybe some of the benefits to working in such a busy area?
I mean, we will, myself or Rob, we will never run out of prospects or leads to call. That's what comes to mind immediately. If you're working in any sales job in New York City and you say you have nobody to call or nobody to reach out to, you're lying to yourself and you're lying to your sales manager. So that's the absolute number one advantage to me is that on a given day, there's nobody I can't. There's not going to be a company out there that I can't have a worthwhile conversation about for why they should be using hospitality, with us here at Madison Square Garden. They might not necessarily buy, but I know that I can have that conversation with them.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, growing up in New Jersey, we have a bit of a reputation, New Jersey and New Yorkers, for being pretty tough people. So, I mean, trying to sell in this market, I think, has been crucial in toughening you up as a salesperson too. I mean, people are very willing to give you, rejection and tell you no, and tell you off. But that's something where it's learning experiences. And I think it's being in this market has helped me, again, be more creative with my outreach and kind of figure out ways to work through that and the difficulties that can come with the toughness of this market.
And though we did note earlier that you've both in part found success with what you do because you're personable and friendly individuals, let's be honest, Rob from the Newark, New Jersey area, Ryan being from the Southie Boston area, I'm sure you can both be tough when the time is needed. In looking at your experiences, both of you spending 5 to 7 years here in the New York market, what would you say the impact of selling in such a busy and saturated setting has done for you as a professional, and how has that helped you grow?
Well, Rob kind of alluded to it earlier. I mean, just when you do get rejection here, it's not necessarily always in the nicest fashion all the time. So just building building those calluses and building up that tough outer skin as a salesperson is absolutely crucial to have some success. So I wouldn't want to learn the selling process anywhere beyond New York City. I haven't done it the last 6 years. I wouldn't be half the salesperson I am without selling in a challenging environment where people will call you out if they don't agree with what you're saying, or people will tell you flat out no, sometimes pretty rudely if they feel like they need to. It just to develop that tough skin to again go back to that closer's mentality. When you blow a save and you go out there the next day, you can't be thinking about it. So New York City and this market as a whole is just absolutely toughening me up from that perspective. And again, I wouldn't trade that for anything else.
Yeah, I second that totally. And I think what we do in general in this industry, selling suite leases and different premium hospitality is, in my opinion, is the toughest sale that you can do. So we're already doing a tough job to begin with, and kind of pair that with the people that we're trying to sell and the difficulties of getting through to the right decision makers, and then having them be willing to have the conversation with you is where you get the most growth out of it. And as much as I love doing, ticket sales and the personal buyers and all that stuff, I really don't think you truly learn as a salesperson until you start hitting, B2B, the industry is pretty hard, and toughen yourself up with this market.
And I just to piggyback on that, it teaches you persistence. I mean, a lot of the times too, it's not even necessarily people saying no to us. It's continuing to, people are just busy in New York City. It's tough to get someone to give you 20 minutes, a half hour to make your sales pitch. So being willing to commit to, calling once, twice, 3 times, following up with an email, doing so in a way that's not, being a pest or being anything beyond just persistent. But that's, you learn quickly that, hey, it's going to be difficult to get that time on someone's calendar. So if you're not willing to put the time in to do that, you're just not going to get it.
That does make sense. And Rob, you mentioned something I'd love for you to elaborate on here briefly, if you could. You had mentioned that, especially within a sports team, you find in some ways that selling premium hospitality might be the most challenging role. Can you tell us briefly why you feel that way?
Yeah, and hopefully this doesn't rub people that do other types of sales the wrong way, but we're selling products to people that aren't needs for the most part. I mean, you have to identify, if it's a company that is, you're lucky enough to find a company that's maybe relocating to your area or expanding, then that's more, easy conversation, because it's, how are you engaging with your employees to get them to be comfortable with what's going on, internally for your company. So you do something like, premium outings to, send them out and keep things happy. But again, not like it's tough to find companies that actually need that. There's companies all over the world that need to market. They need to get their brand out there and their name out there. And, a sponsorship of a sports team is a great way to do that. Ticket sales, there are families that are diehard fans of the team that are willing to spend thousands of dollars to come out and support them. So I think there's not as much inbound, leads of people raising their hand that want to buy a suite lease. So that's where, and I haven't sold sponsorships, so I understand that's a tough job too. Just I've always felt that selling a suite lease is probably the most difficult thing. 16 tickets to 150 events is pretty tough pill to swallow for most.
I can 100% appreciate where you're coming from. And like you say, I don't think there's a ton of companies out there that have a premium hospitality budget, while almost all of them do have a sponsorship budget. So hopefully nobody will take that the wrong way, but I do appreciate you elaborating there for us. Ryan, any thoughts on that that you want to expound on?
No, I think you nailed it on the head. And you just said it too. We have to get companies to build a brand new budget line effectively. That companies know that they need a market, they know they need to put their name out there, and that's at the beginning of the year, the beginning of their fiscal year. That's already considered. If we're speaking to company ABC who's never done any sort of hospitality or client entertaining in that fashion previously, to get a company to move to create that new budget line is. That's a massive hill to climb over. So everything that Rob said, I think he nailed it on the head.
Well, one thing I'm sure that all of our listeners and I am definitely starting to understand over our conversation is you guys definitely like a challenge. So I'm sure you guys both kind of like it that way on some level. So in looking outside of sports, let's consider some of the skill sets and talents you've developed in doing what you do professionally, gentlemen. What's something else you maybe consider doing or could see yourself doing if you weren't doing corporate sales in sports?
Yeah, I've gotten so used to selling and being in a client facing role. I don't necessarily know if I'd want to do something else. At least, in this stage of my career, it's certainly not something I've considered. That said, I mean, switching over to the service side and be somebody who's more, someone who's taking care of a client as opposed to going out to find brand new ones. It's kind of a cheating answer to say the service side, but yeah, again, it's not something I've really put much thought into so far in my career. I'm enjoying selling, and I hope to continue to do it for some time. But
yeah, the one thing industry I would say, and it would have made my mother extremely happy because she always wanted me to go to law school, would be I'd be an attorney. I mean, I don't necessarily know the industry in and out, but to a degree, being a lawyer is selling. You're selling the case that is going on with your client. It's similar where you need to be organized, have the self-confidence that you do in sales, ability to public speak. That's the one that I would say there's some parallels without doing sales or service specifically. And like I said, if I went that route, my mother would be very pleased. Well, she is pretty happy with what I'm doing now, though.
You guys both clearly have rather strong skill sets that I'm sure would translate to a lot of different industries. So hopefully you don't have to worry about job changes anytime soon, like Ryan mentioned, but I don't think you'll have too hard a time on the job market if it happens. We are going to let you guys go. I know Rob's got some concerts. I think Ryan has a game going on this evening. So again, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on, give us some insights of your experience and educate our audience here. As you guys look at some other sources of content, be those books, magazines, newspapers, even podcasts like this one, what would you recommend our listeners do to improve their knowledge and understanding of our industry and what it is we've talked about today?
For our industry specifically, really anything written by John Spoelstra, the father of Eric Spoelstra of the Miami Heat, the coach of the Miami Heat. He's effectively the godfather of sports marketing. So anything written by John Spoelstra is absolutely worth taking in. Outside of just sports specifically, one of my favorite business books ever was Good to Great by Jim Collins. I just think it's a great look at a lot of companies. It's a little bit older now. The book's probably over 20 years old, but the messages in it still apply. Just looking at companies that have built their reputations over years and the processes that have gone into that. And I think it's a good parallel for your personal brand and how you'd be able to build that over time. So Good to Great by Jim Collins as a whole is just one that I would recommend anybody in any business read.
And we will have all this information on our website, but if you are looking for a good Spoelstra book, Ice to Eskimos is a personal favorite of mine as well. So great recommendation. What about you, Mr. Moran?
So I'm on the other side of the spectrum, and not to make myself sound like an idiot, but I was never the biggest reader. But I do like there's a handful of blogs that I'll go on, one of which Sales Hacker is a pretty good one in terms of just keeping up with sales as a whole and kind of the ideologies behind sales. But I'm more of a podcast guy. So Freakonomics is a great one, just keeping up with business in general. Sports Business Journal does a podcast every day where it's, quick 4 or 5 minute little chat about what's going on around the industry. I think it's very important to kind of know what your competition is doing and different trends that are going on within the industry as a whole. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. That's one of the few books that I've read. So I would recommend that one. It's a doozy. But yeah, I'm more of a blog guy and podcast guy. I think you can get a lot of information with a nice short read, on your train ride into work or whatever it is.
And Rob, as I'm a huge Malcolm Gladwell fan personally, I love that last recommendation. Outliers, especially as you mentioned before, differentiating and separating yourself in such a busy and crowded market as New York. Outliers is a book all about how you can separate yourself from competition. Another good one of his is Tipping Point. And again, you can find all this information on our website. We will begin to wrap this up here for you gentlemen. And Rob, give yourself a little more credit. I'm sure your apartment smells of rich mahogany and has many leather-bound books. But before we let you go, any last bits of advice you want to leave our guests and listeners today?
I would just say for anyone who's looking to get into the sports industry, the cliches you hear about, needing to work harder than the person next to you and needing to, kind of find a different gear. It's a cliche because it's true. Be willing to, if you want to get in, you have to be willing to work those long hours. You have to be willing to take a lot of rejection, specifically on the sales side. And you have to develop a thick skin. So, if you truly have a passion for getting into sports and you want to be in the sports industry, just have that awareness of what you're getting into. Obviously, me and Rob are a little bit biased, but 100% think it's worth it. So, I hope anybody who's looking to pursue that, that they don't let that, getting their hands dirty, intimidate them away from it.
Yeah, for me, my biggest advice would be for anyone getting into the industry, right out of college or that just started in the industry. And I spoke about it earlier, is really just being yourself. If you're in sales, it'll come across to people if it sounds like you're just reading off a script and it's kind of a little robotic. So, loosen up. Sales will come. It's not something that you're going to, perfect overnight. Some people have the personality for it and can do that, but it's something that takes time and practice. And, the more patience you have and the more you are yourself, I think the more successful you'll be. But, we spoke about the grind earlier. It's definitely a grind. It's a lot of hard work and a lot of hours and working games, but you got to remember you're working for a sports team. So it's a pretty cool opportunity. There's plenty of people out there that want to do the job too. And you're somebody who's lucky enough to have the opportunity to do so. So really just making sure you keep your head down and keep going.
And while I definitely don't want to minimize the value of both those pieces of advice, it's amazing that at the end of the day, it comes down to things as simple as just being genuine or being tenacious. Again, thank you guys so much for coming on, being a resource for our listeners. Enjoy your time this weekend. Best of luck moving forward with the hockey season and basketball season starting up. And again, thank you for joining us here on Sports Business Nation, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks a lot, Ron.
As we now try to digest the key insights and takeaways from our conversation with Rob Moran and Ryan England, let's take a moment to unpack their core points from the commentary.
That's what I think of when I think of saturated market. I don't just think sports. I think everything else that New York City has to offer.
Businesses have so many different opportunities and avenues they can go down to entertain and get in front of their clients. And it's how are you going to be the one that stands out?
As both Rob and Ryan have spoken about, busy and crowded markets are not only saturated for your product, but usually for a variety of product types. So overlapping competition comes with the territory. It's hard enough to stand apart from other teams within your same sport, but then when you factor in other sports leagues, similar entertainment offerings outside of sports, and all the other ways people choose to spend time building relationships, that can be a lot to go up against. That's why striving to stand apart and differentiate yourself are essential in getting noticed and taken seriously in a saturated market.
I mean, we will, myself or Rob, we will never run out of prospects or leads to call. That's what comes to mind immediately.
We have a bit of a reputation, New Jersey and New Yorkers, for being pretty tough people. So, trying to sell in this market, I think, has been crucial in toughening you up as a salesperson too.
So while there's obviously a lot of hard work to be done, there are clearly also several upsides to working and selling within such a crowded space. There's the constant pool of local business and personal prospects available to you. So by adding a little more elbow grease and remembering to differentiate yourself, you can almost create limitless opportunities. And while rejection is rarely fun, Rob suggested author Malcolm Gladwell is famous for his 10,000 hours for excellence theory, suggesting that to become excellent at almost anything, it requires extensive experience in intentional practice and repeated failure. So remember that each time you're hung up on or cursed out, you did also just get that much better.